welcome back to the Apatros review. In this episode, Pulse 3. Hi there, welcome back to the Apatros review. I'm your host Mila Sipka, and join me as I take you on the wild world through science fiction, action, and horror, all from my personal collection. Now, in this episode, we finish off with the Pulse trilogy. That's the American remake of the Japanese Cairo. We have Pulse 3, which was the second of two direct-to-video sequels that were made through Dimension Extreme, which was a subsidiary of Dimension, which specialized in really awful direct-to-video films. Now, this DVD, this Australian DVD, was released through Real DVD, which is a label that released many roadshow entertainment films here in Region 4. And this particular disc is, like Pulse, was very rare to find. In fact, my copies of Pulse 2 and 3 were both ex-rentals. Now, as for the story, the year is 2014, 7 years after the world was invaded by killer phantoms that sucked the souls out of anybody they came in contact with, using Wi-Fi networks to exist in this realm. In a refugee camp near Houston, Texas, Justine, a young woman who's lived in the camp for the past 7 years, is tired of the repressive conditions with her foster family and the strict anti-technology stance that the survivors in the camp have adopted. That all changes one night when she finds an old laptop hidden in an abandoned car. Managing to recharge the laptop's battery, Justine is astounded when, upon turning it on, she comes in contact with Adam, a mysterious chat room user that claims to be living in a city, which is still considered off-limits. Intrigued by the idea of a survivor living in a city full of killer ghosts, Justine decides to leave the camp to trek to the city in order to meet up with Adam. After staying the night with a cotton farmer and narrowly surviving an encounter with his phantom wife, Justine realizes that the phantoms don't want to hurt her, so she's being protected by them. But she discovers that the phantoms are being controlled by Adam, the chat room user, and that the protection they're giving her comes at a price. All she has to do is to steal a specially modified USB thumb drive from a hacker living in the city who is working with the US military's surviving top brass, who plan to use their nuclear arsenal to rid the world of the phantoms forever. Now, this was the third and last film in the trilogy of films that began with Pulse, a 2006 remake of a hit Japanese ghost story called Cairo, Pulse in English, from Kiyoshi Kurosawa. The original film was a willfully cryptic and at times hard to decipher metaphor for the loneliness of most of the human race, mixed in with suicidal themes and an apocalyptic ending that really stretched the concept to the limits of its narrative. The remake has a much better written script courtesy of Wes Craven, which ties up all the loose ends of the original's plot together to make something that makes a lot better sense. But the result was botched by the lackluster direction from director Jim Sonzero, the MTV commercials director, who really had no clue how to make the story spectacular enough or even get any interest from the plot. Essentially, it was a film that glided by on autopilot. Then the sequels came. In 2008, director Joel Swanson, who is a director that pretty much had a career of finishing other people's films, he's basically like a hatchet man who gets called in when the director leaves a project, convinced his studio backers that he could make a film that used the same number of visual effects shots as the big blockbusters, but on a very tiny fraction of their budget. So they gave him the budget to try his idea out. Swazan uses the resources of Neo Art and Logic, a small studio that is known for making cheap B-grade sequels to some of the franchises in Dimension's catalog, and usually ending up with cheap botch jobs, particularly the post-millennial Hellraiser sequels, for an example. I'll cover those in the future. To make a pair of sequels, Pulse expand on the narrative and complete the story. To do this, Swazan had almost all the scenes shot in front of a green screen and digitally added in the locations and background post-production. It almost worked, if it wasn't for the fact that the whole thing looked surprisingly fake, and while I didn't have too much of an issue with the way the ghosts were depicted, the way the ghosts were like static, it fit in with their nature. The quality of the rest of the effects was shockingly mediocre, and the sheer CGI overkill, along with some bad acting from Georgina Rylance and Lee Garlington, really sank the first sequel, Pulse 2 Afterlife, into bad movie land. As for Pulse 3, Swazan actually managed to shine a mistake by making the second sequel the better of the two, and I will go out on a limb to say that Pulse 3 is actually the best film in the entire trilogy, but not in the way you necessarily think. The original Pulse, or Cairo in Japanese, was not exactly a horror film but a slow-burning supernatural drama about the ghosts standing in as a metaphor for the lonely lives of socially isolated people. The remake made a pretty big mistake by trying to wring out a standard PG-13 horror light concept out of the story, and the first sequel, Pulse to Afterlife, did better by making itself a story about the destruction of a society those two dependent on the technology they created to serve themselves. And the apocalypse has a background for the breakup of a small family, as a divorced father tried to save his young daughter from the ghost of his crazy ex-wife. Pulse Free is not making any pretensions to be a serious horror movie. Instead, it comes across as a slow-burning tale of a young woman trying to make sense of the devastated world she now lives in, as she makes a dangerous journey across ruined wastelands and into the ruins of the sea to track down a mysterious friend, only to realize that she's now at the pawn in a deadly game with the fate of mankind at stake. There are times when you can see that a low budget actually works in this film's favor. The scaled-back boundaries of the story gives the film a sort of minimalist visual poetry, with the digitally added-in location shots in some scenes actually managing to invoke a certain sort of post-apocalyptic wonder, and the small cast adds to the atmosphere considerably, not to mention the cast giving a decent portrayal of survivors, although characterizations are not exactly too well rounded. There are still some flaws at Pulse 3, however. Screenwriting is still not Joel Swazin's forte. The two Pulse sequels both have some spectacularly idiotic scripting on show. With Pulse 3, clearly Swazin should have fact-checked his work and did the math because there's some glaringly serious flops here. First off, the previous film's surviving main cast member, a 6-year-old girl, has somehow managed to go from 6 years old to the ripe age of 17 in only 7 years. Amazing, eh? Clearly, she should have been recast with a 13-year-old actress, or the script changed to a decade after the previous film instead of 7 years, which should have the film being set in 2017 instead of 2014. As for the issue with the laptop, I'm willing to play devil's advocate here and claim that Swanson didn't exactly go too off key with the fact the laptop left alone for 7 years would still work. Justine did manage to recharge the device by siphoning power from the camp's machinery workshop. Before there is a question, where did she get the charging adapter from? And the laptop's battery didn't last very long, so plausibility is still pretty solid in that one. I'll avoid the whole issue of society's survivors who shun all forms of technology beyond the realms of simple workshop-grade power tools, mainly because it's too much of a shit. Don't worry about that. Too much of a shit fight, and I don't exactly have too much time left in this review to cover it in any significant detail. You can make your own conclusions about that one. And besides, I didn't have too much pull in the plot. But the ending, where the surviving members of the US military sent up all their nuclear arsenal around the world to kill the ghosts by the combined power of the new EMP blasts, and fast launching a de facto nuclear war, is just too much. It's ridiculous to see how sending the world into nuclear winter for the next century or so, while killing the ghosts by destroying the world's Wi-Fi, while hoping that all the fallout stays in the upper atmosphere, will possibly prevent the remaining 20% of the world's population from being severely depleted by the initial nuclear blasts, and from the nuclear fallout eventually coming down or having to start the technology all over again from scratch, given that EMP basically shuts down just about any form of electrically powered technology, aside from certain military-grade equipment. It really is a shock of an ending if you invest even minutes thought into the whole concept. Although you could say that with the world's population already seriously depleted by the phantoms, once you hit rock bottom, the only way to go is up. Also to note, the Pulse 3 actually starts off with a scene. The first scene the film has is a couple who they've never actually met, but their houses are all, apartments are all fixed with computer monitors and TV screens with cameras so they can see what each other is doing in different rooms. It's a ridiculous setup, and Joel Swazin on the commentary track actually explained that he wrote the scene because he heard about a couple lived who lives lived like who were a couple for years and they never actually met. Kind of, I mean, if you look at the scene, it's ridiculous. I mean, the power costs alone are probably astronomical. As for the gore report, this is not really meant to be a gory film given the premise, but there are two moments where there is a slight modicum of gore. The cannibal survivor passes by Justine with pieces of meat in his shopping trolley, while the cotton farmer's wife keeps repeating her suicide by shotgunning half her head off. The fact that she's a ghost makes the spectral gore down impact. As for nudity, there is one brief nudity in this topless nudity, where the man in the plan, the hacker, gives Justine a drink of water all the while she's being held in an improvised prison cell of a female phantom. He stuns the ghost with a laser pointer, causing it to writhe in agony, with her white dress slipping off partially, giving us a brief view of her left breast nipple. It's brief, but it's there, believe me. I'd give Pulse 3 a C+, which is a 5 out of 10, meaning it's a passable film that might appeal to fans of post-apocalyptic survival drama. And there's been quite a few films in the past 15 years, which films like The Book of Eli, for example, which are just not really not post-apocalyptic films, but not like action or horror based, just like dramas. Quiet Earth could be another example of that. I mean, A Quiet Place. I mean, and there was that '80s film, The Quiet Earth, which was pretty similar to that. You don't have to watch the previous two films in the Pulse trilogy, but it might be needed to come to grips with the franchise's story. Now, as for the DVD, this was released into Region 4 DVD by Real DVD, a label that puts out both budget This is a Roadshow and Ninth Dimension sourced films. As you can see, that's the cover. While also reissuing old Roadshow titles. As was the case with the previous film, the picture quality is excellent, but there is a catch. The good quality only makes the bad location effects much more obvious to notice. The sound quality is as good as the picture, but doesn't highlight any production flaws. In fact, the sound design is pretty good with this film. There are English subtitles available and the well-timed match dialogue almost word for word, with some sound cues put in. Supplement consists of an audio commentary featuring director Joel Swartzen and some of the production crew. There is a short behind-the-scenes segment that explains some aspects of production, also featuring a guide on how to pronounce the production designer's name. Not really needed, but pretty amusing all the same. There is a preview trailer of another film that plays upon boot up. Needless to say, both the DVDs of Pulse 2 Afterlife and Pulse 3 are pretty rare to find. Yeah, they're kind of hard. In fact, my copies are both from X Rentals. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and the next episode I'll do will cover the original Pulse, Cairo. So now I'm going to do another 3 days from now. It's on the 6th of April. Anyway, I hope you guys are fine, and this coronavirus is just really causing some serious problems with the shutdown we're having. Yeah, that's it for this review.